Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today because I've kind of been having fun recently doing some videos where I look at what either like Google or an article says are the best writers of a certain area. So originally for Women's History Month, I did the best female writers, typed that into Google and checked to see how many of them I have read. Last week, because of St. Patrick's Day, I found a list from Oprah's O Magazine that detailed some Irish books that they thought everybody should read. This week, I want to do another one of those because I've been having a good time doing these. I've gotten some good feedback on them, so I wanted to do another one. I also kind of wanted to address something that's been going on in the U.S., particularly over the last year. There has been a lot of discrimination and hatred and violence going on against Asian American citizens, and it's really unfortunate. And there was that tragic instance last week where there were some shootings, and I feel like it's a good time to put a spotlight on Asian American people in the US in a positive light, because I feel like there can be a lot of othering that's going on, especially in the pandemic, and there's a lot of blame, and it's really unfortunate. And so I wanted to do something that I've been doing on my channel lately that is kind of fun, but also with that added layer, because I feel like the Asian American experience is something that is frequently overlooked. Asian American people are frequently othered in this country, and I also feel like it's an experience that is often forgotten in the United States. And I think part of that is visibility, but I think the other thing is that Asia is a really large continent, and it covers a very broad range of experiences and cultures, and that makes it difficult to grasp in sort of broad strokes. And that's why I'm not going to be doing a Google search for like the best Asian American authors, because I did actually type that into Google and the results are a mess. So I looked for an article and I found a BuzzFeed article, 32 Essential Asian American Writers You Need to Be Reading. And that's what I'm going to be going by. And this is definitely an area I want to do better with. I have not read a whole lot of books by Asian American authors, so I'm hoping that this list is also going to be a tool of discovery for me. I have seen the first person on the list, and I fully expect that Amy Tan is going to be on the list. Just a wild guess, but I haven't really looked very, very far. I anticipate I will not have read many of these authors. There may even be authors I have not heard of, but to expand my own horizons, I really wanted to do this because it's something I need to do better about as well. Expand that visibility, and let's just be nice to people and not blame people for things they didn't do and are not responsible for, and just try to love each other a little bit. So I don't want to preach too hard. Let's just get into the BuzzFeed list. So let's get to the first name on the list. I have seen who this author is. It's Alexander Chee. Now, they have quick blurbs for each person that say why you should read him. I'm going to read them for everybody. Why you should read him. Alexander Chee's work thoughtfully touches upon sexuality, race, and identity, but beyond that, his writing strives to capture the universal experience of what it means to be human and all the flawed beauty it entails. I've heard really good things about Alexander Chee. I've heard really good things about Queen of the Night. I think he has a novel called Edinburgh, and that's supposed to be really good, but I've never read any of his books, and I really need to get around to that. From what I've heard from people who have read his books, they love them. Queen of the Night, I almost picked up just for like a quick read, and then I saw how thick the book is, so I didn't pick it up for that, but that is definitely something that's on my radar. It sounds like a really interesting book. Edinburgh, I think, was one of the books that Douglas Stewart recommended as great LGBTQ books. I could be wrong about that. Yes, Alexander Chee is an author I definitely need to get acquainted with and get to know a little bit better. Let's see. Second person is Paul Yoon. This is really funny because I had never heard of Paul Yoon until about 2-3 days ago when so I'm doing a little bit of research into potential Pulitzer Prize winners for this year. And Paul Yoon is somebody who has popped up on a couple of predictions lists, and I had never heard of him, but I looked into the book that they had particularly mentioned, which they don't mention it here because this is an older article. I'll just pull it up and tell you. It's Run Me to Earth, which is it's not a short story collection, but it's sort of like an interlocked stories deal from what I can tell, and it sounds really fascinating. And I had looked into his other books, Once the Shore and Snow Hunters, and they sound really good as well. So this is another author I really need, but it's just really funny because I only just learned who he was 2 or 3 days ago. So why you should read him. Paul Yoon's lyrical prose burns brightly on the page, and his work addresses some of the bleakest circumstances, the legacy of war, and the loneliness and isolation that can accompany it. He is definitely on my TBR, and I need to spend more time with him. Number 3, I guessed it, Amy Tan is right there at number 3. So why you should read her. Drawing on her own personal experiences, Amy Tan's work beautifully explores the complex facets of Chinese American identity, as well as the dynamics of mother-daughter relationships troubled by cultural and generational differences. If you know me at all, you know that cultural generational differences, generational trauma, things like that, those are like complicated families. Those are things that instantly make me interested in a book or an author. She's got all of that. I've only ever read one Amy Tan book, and it's not her biggest book. It's The Bonesetter's Daughter, and I remember really liking that book. That's a story about a daughter dealing with the onset of her mother's dementia. The Joy Luck Club is, of course, Amy Tan's most famous book. I have a copy. I just have not gotten around to it. I have seen the movie several times, and it never fails to make me cry. I just haven't gotten around to reading the book yet. I feel like when you talk about Asian American authors, she is always the person who is at the top of the list because of the Joy Luck Club. But she has written many other books, and is definitely an author that I am familiar with, but need to explore a little bit more. Coming in at number 4, oh no, Hanya Yanigahara. I've had one good experience with Hanya Yanigahara and one bad experience. And I know a lot of people love A Little Life, but that's the bad experience. I really enjoyed People in the Trees. That is a book that I think more people should discover. It's a very interesting book. However, it's interesting that some of the more abrasive things in the People in the Trees really expand and explode in A Little Life in a way that I did not respond to. So what do they say? Why you should read her. Dark and haunting, Hanya Yanigahara's novels explore the persistence of trauma, bravely delving into the deepest recesses of the psyche to expose the roots of pain and suffering that afflict modern human life. I mean, that's fair. The interesting thing about The People in the Trees is that it's set as like a fake biography of someone. I enjoyed that book. I did not like A Little Life. So far, I'm actually not doing bad. I've at least heard of all of these authors. We're at number 4, and I've read 2 of the 4. And the other 2 are names that are known to me as recently as 2 or 3 days ago. So I'm not doing badly yet, but there's still a lot to go. Number 5, Jhumpa Lahiri. And this is where we kind of expand out in the definition of Asia and Asian American, because a lot of people forget India is part of Asia. So I've read every book that Jhumpa Lahiri has published so far. She has one coming out in April that obviously I have not read yet. I don't remember the last one she published, but I am a huge fan of Interpreter of Maladies, which was her debut short story collection. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It's really good. What did they say? Why you should read her. Informed by her own experience as an immigrant, Jhumpa Lahiri's work addresses the anxieties and struggles of Indian American immigrants and the deeply felt cultural gaps they encounter in a country very different from their homeland. And that is very much what they're all about that, but Interpreter of Maladies is like the embodiment of all of that, and it's so good. If you haven't read The Interpreter of Maladies, I would absolutely recommend you pick it up. It's so good. Maxine Hong Kingston is number 5. I have not read her. So they say, why you should read her. Maxine Hong Kingston is one of the most influential voices in Asian American literature, and her work often blends fiction and nonfiction, myth and memory, while critically exploring themes of ethnicity, gender, cultural conflict, and womanhood. And so she wrote, what's it called? Maybe it says here. The Woman Warrior. That's the one that comes up the most. I remember when I was working at Borders, it was assigned as summer reading a fair amount for the high school in the town where I was working. But I never got around to reading it. And I do feel like this is kind of a big gap in my reading because, yeah, I agree with what they say. She is one of the most influential voices in Asian American literature. People always think of Amy Tan because she's the more commercial success, but Maxine Hong Kingston is like right there under the surface, and she's definitely somebody I need to read more. I need to read it all because I haven't read any of her books. Okay, here we go. Number 7. The first one I have not heard of at all. Porochista Khakpour. And I really hope I said that right. This is the danger of going in without peeking, is that I can't try to prepare for pronunciation. So I really hope I got that correct. Why you should read her. Porochista Khakpour's novels examine what it means to be Persian in America through the lens of vivid, relatable characters with sharp humor and large-hearted wisdom laced throughout. The books that they mention are Suns and Other Flammable Objects and The Last Illusion. They have beautiful covers. So this is definitely an author I'm going to need to seek out more information on because I am totally unfamiliar with her. This right here is the first time I have ever even heard her name. Number 8, Celeste Ng. I've read one of her books. I read Little Fires Everywhere, which is probably her big one. I have a copy of Everything I Never Told You. I think I purchased it on ebook back when I used to read ebooks, and I just don't anymore, so I keep forgetting that I have a copy of it because I never go into my e-reader at all, but I'm pretty sure I have a copy of it in there. Anyway, but I was always really interested in reading Everything I Never Told You. I just never got around to it. I did read Little Fires Everywhere, and then I watched the Hulu series Little Fires Everywhere, which I think actually improves on the book because it streamlines some of the plot lines, or it sands out some of the plot lines that don't do anything for the book and focuses in on the ones that are really thematically interesting. So, why you should read her. Celeste Ng's debut novel, Everything I Never Told You, is a moving commentary on the complexities of race and gender and a heartbreaking portrait of Chinese-American family who must grapple with an unspeakable tragedy. And I think she's very good at that. She's very good at inserting... I haven't read Everything I Never Told You, but in Little Fires Everywhere, she takes the most discussed topic of like racial relations in America, which is of course the difference between white people and black people in America, and throws the Asian American experience in there in very interesting ways. And she's a writer who's very good at writing sort of like quote unquote commercial fiction, which I know a lot of people don't like, but she's really good at writing fiction that will appeal to people but also make them think, based on Little Fires Everywhere. And I would like to get to Everything I Never Told You, and I would be very curious about what she publishes next. Number 9, Cathy Park Hong. I don't think I'm familiar with her. Why you should read her. Cathy Park Hong's poetry is daring and refreshingly original. Okay, so if she writes poetry, I've definitely never heard of her. Examining the boundaries we erect between disparate cultures and languages, and sometimes even experimenting with language itself. The books they reference here are Dance Dance Revolution and Engine Empire. I do need to try to read more poetry. I read a poetry collection last year as part of my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge, and I really enjoyed it. Traditionally, I'm very intimidated by poetry, so maybe this would be a good way for me to and I do want to read at least one other poetry volume in 2021 to try to expand off of that a little bit. So maybe she is a good author for me to look at for that. Number 10, Chang Ray Lee. I think I've read half of 2 different Chang Ray Lee books, and I can't think of which ones they are. Let's do the description. Why you should read him. Chang Ray Lee's novels capture the painful realities of the Asian American immigrant experience with tenderness through his examination of identity, alienation, and assimilation. The novels they reference are Native Speaker, which I have not read, and I think that's kind of like his big book. And the other one is On Such a Full Sea, which I did not read, but I have heard really good things about it. Maybe I should try it. I think Aloft was one of the ones that I tried and I just didn't really get into, and I don't remember why. I remember when it came out, I was still working at Borders. I don't remember what it was that I didn't respond to, but I put it down and never returned to it. So I feel like Chang Ray Lee is an author I should probably retry, and maybe with a different book. Native Speaker is definitely the big one. I did hear a lot of really good things about On Such a Full Sea when it was published, because he's an author where, because I put down Aloft, I tend to see that he has a new book out and think, oh, not for me. There was another book that I started and didn't finish, and I don't remember what it is, and they don't list them out, and I'm not going to look up right now. I want to keep going. We're at number 11, Viet Nguyen. So Viet Nguyen won the Pulitzer Prize for The Sympathizer, which I read and thought was okay. I liked parts of it and I didn't like others, and I don't want to get into the whole thing of why here right now. But I also think Viet Nguyen is an interesting person. I've seen interviews that were really good. I found the book The Best We Could Do by T. Bui because he had recommended it. He is just releasing a sort of sequel to The Sympathizer, and I'm blanking on the name of it this year. And I didn't put it on my most anticipated list, but it is something I'm kind of thinking. I feel like I'm going to wait until he gets out of that universe, since I didn't really like The Sympathizer all that much. Why you should read him. Viet Nguyen's gripping debut novel, The Sympathizer, shimmers with brilliance, offering an important new perspective on the Vietnam War and announcing Nguyen as a literary voice to be reckoned with. I don't argue with that. I just didn't quite respond to The Sympathizer myself. Number 12, Anchee Min. I have never read an Anchee Min book, and I feel like that's something I definitely need to get around to. Why you should read her. Not only are Anchee Min's memoirs of her experience as a Chinese immigrant in America both poignant and illuminating, but also her historical novels brim brightly with strong female protagonists, a whole set of fearless literary role models to inspire readers. That's got me convinced. I need to prioritize some of her books. The two that they mention are Red Azalea and Pearl of China. Red Azalea is a memoir, and Pearl of China is one of her historical novels. So that really got me interested. That just bumped her way up my TBR. I need to get a copy of one of her books. I wonder if my local used bookstore has any of her books. I'm gonna have to check that out because that blurb really got me interested in learning more about her. Number 13, Mira Jacob. Okay, so I have a copy of The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing on my bookshelf. I actually managed to get an advanced reader's copy of it. Don't remember how. I think this article is old enough that it's not going to talk about the book of hers that I have actually read, which is Good Talk. It's sort of a graphic memoir about conversations she had with her son about race in America, and it's fascinating. It's so good that I was just on the verge of getting rid of The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing, figuring I'm never going to get around to reading this, and that convinced me to keep it until I do get around to it. So what they say is, why you should read her. Mira Jacob's luminous debut novel, The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing, spans different generations and cultures, powerfully illustrating the enduring bonds of family in prose that is as often funny as it is tender and heartbreaking. And that might as well be about Good Talk as well, because, God, check out Good Talk, for sure. And I need to get around to The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing. That is something I would love to do now that I've read Good Talk. Number 14, I'm familiar with the name, have not read her. Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. Why you should read her. Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni's writing insightfully depicts the Indian immigrant experience in contemporary America, particularly from the perspective of women and all of the challenges that it can present. And that is why she's an author who sounds interesting to me. I just have never gotten around to reading at all. And the books that they mention are Sister of My Heart and Oleander Girl. I've heard of Sister of My Heart. I've heard good things about that over the years, but I'm unfamiliar with Oleander Girl. And she's an author I definitely need to get to. I've heard of her. I don't own a copy of any of her books. To be honest, I've never sought out any of her books in a library, but she's definitely somebody who's on my radar screen. And that description kind of bumped her up a little bit. I need to look more closely at some of her works. Number 15, Khaled Hosseini. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that name. He wrote The Kite Runner, A Thousand Splendid Suns, and and The Mountain is Echoed. I cheated. I looked at the picture. The two that they have are The Kite Runner and The Mountains Echoed. I thought The Kite Runner was a good book. I didn't love it as much as a lot of other people did. I thought A Thousand Splendid Suns was fantastic. A very interesting book. I really liked that one a lot. And then The Mountains Echoed, I don't remember a whole lot about the plot of that one. I remember thinking it was back to sort of like the Kite Runner level. Like, it was good, but I wouldn't say anything special. Why you should read him. Khaled Hosseini's novels revolve around Afghan characters, importantly exploring themes of honor, ethnic tensions, familial sacrifice, and the Afghan immigrant experience. If you haven't read any of his books, I'd say jump to A Thousand Splendid Suns. That's the one that stands out the most to me, because I've read everything he's published so far. Number 16, I have never heard of. Lysley Tenorio. Why you should read him. Lysley Tenorio's debut short story collection, Monstrous, tenderly peers at the lives of those who find themselves caught between Filipino and American cultures, and his heartfelt, often funny writing both brings vivid characters to life and comments poignantly on the human condition. That sounds really interesting. Apparently, Monstrous is the only one they mention, and I have not heard of it. I wonder if he's published anything since this article was published. But that sounds really interesting. I'd never heard of him, but based on that description, it sounds like somebody I would get along with. All right, we're about halfway there. I'm going to try to speed through some of these. Number 17, Lisa C. I read Snowflower and the Secret Fan, and I remember liking it, but I haven't read any of her other books. Why you should read her. Lisa C's novels strive to uncover and revive forgotten Chinese history, delving into fascinating stories of war, immigration, womanhood, and identity, and are necessarily informed by her experience in a biracial, bicultural family. Snowflower and the Secret Fan is it's a historical novel about two female friends and the different courses that their life took and how they are eventually kind of separated by circumstance and by arranged marriages. They go through the foot binding process, which was kind of painful to read about. I'm sure it would be even more painful for anyone who has lived through such a thing. Interesting book. I enjoyed it. I just have never read any of her other books, and maybe I should get around to doing that. Number 18, Justin Chin. Why you should read him. Justin Chin's poetry reads like a very raw and real map of the queer Asian American experience and all of its complexities and implications, and his writing is often as witty and defiant as it is vulnerable. You can guess I've never heard of him since I am not super familiar with poetry. So I'd never heard of him, but that blurb puts him way at the top of my list of poetry to try, because I need to try more poetry, and the queer Asian American experience is definitely something I need to expand my horizons on and get a little more intimately acquainted with, because it's really important to kind of shine a light on that experience. It is not often talked about enough in the LGBTQ community. So I would be very curious to read something of his. The collections they have here are Bite Hard and Mongrel. Number 19, Paisley Rekdal. Never heard of her. Why you should read her. Paisley Rekdal's poems probe at the very heart of what makes us human, examining love, sexuality, power, and memory with a restless energy. That sounds beautiful, and I can see why I don't know her, because it's poetry and I'm not familiar with poetry, as we discussed. But that sounds like a really interesting description of her work. The two works that they mention here are The Night My Mother Met Bruce Lee and Animal Eye. So just, from the name, The Night My Mother Met Bruce Lee, it sounds like a little bit of a humorous interpretation. So I would be interested in seeing more of her work. Number 20, Vu Tran. I have not heard of him. Vu Tran's work thoughtfully contemplates cultural identity in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the ways in which historical trauma both shapes and obligates us. I mentioned earlier, I'm very interested in generational trauma as a theme in literature, so you can imagine that really grabbed my attention. I'm going to have to come back and bookmark all of the ones that really jump out to me, and this is one of them that I will have to circle back to. Number 21. Oh, wow. They are really going to challenge my ability to pronounce names. I'm going to type the name out. It's Aimee Nezhukumatathil. I really hope I pronounced that correctly. But again, I will type it out down here. Why you should read her. Her poetry draws upon her mixed Filipina and Indian heritage, brimming with rich images and colors and textures from each culture to form a lush, multi-layered body of work. That sounds really interesting. And I do need to explore more poetry. I'm getting a lot of good poetry recommendations from this list, which I was not expecting when I picked it up. Number 22, Matthew Celestes. And again, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Why you should read him. His fiction beautifully captures the disorder and yearning that threads modern human life, painting devastatingly honest vignettes of our flaws and desires. That sounds really interesting. So the two books that they mention are I'm Not Saying, I'm Just Saying, and The 100-Year Flood. I feel like I may have seen The 100-Year Flood in a store because the cover looks familiar, but I've never read any of his work. The description sounds very interesting. Number 23 is an author I'm very familiar with from my days at Borders, but I have not read. It's Thrity Umrigar. Why you should read her. Much of Thrity Umrigar's work examines cultural divides between India and America, but the way in which she creates universally relatable characters and stories that spur introspection in the reader transcends any one culture. I think she is someone I'm really familiar with from my Borders days because a lot of book clubs read her novels. The Story Hour and The Space Between Us are the two that they mentioned. The Space Between Us is the one that most people came in for when I was working at Borders. And it seems like it's a book that a lot of people really enjoyed talking about in a sort of group setting that a book club would lend itself to. But I've never read it, and maybe I should get around to that. I've heard really good things about it. Number 24, Katherine Chung. Not familiar. Why you should read her. Katherine Chung's haunting debut novel, Forgotten Country, is an elegant, heartrending story of identity, immigration, and familial obligation that expertly weaves Korean myth and history into a modern narrative. That sounds really interesting. Apparently she is also an essayist, but I had never heard of that book at all. That's part of why I'm really enjoying this process, and I think this one in particular is introducing me to a lot of things that were unfamiliar to me, which is kind of the goal. So I'll have to circle back and look a little more closely at that. Number 25, Patrick Rosal. Have not heard of him. Patrick Rosal's vibrant poetry, there you go, that's why I haven't heard of him, often reflect on his own lineage, unflinchingly looking at nationality and family and how our present is haunted by the ghosts of complex pasts and urging readers to do the same. That sounds very interesting. The collections that they mention here are My American Kundamen and Bone Shepherds. Again, I need to read more poetry, so I'm going to have to kind of mentally bookmark his name, so when I come back through this article later today, I look a little more closely at him. Number 26, Bharati Mukherjee. Why you should read her. Her work insightfully depicts the difficulties of being an Asian immigrant in America, particularly the transformations that South Asian women undergo to adjust to a new home and culture, and the ways in which American society also adjusts to embrace them. That's a very unique kind of twist, because a lot of immigrant stories talk about the immigrant adapting to America, and they don't really talk about America adapting to the immigrant culture, except in incidental ways or indirect ways. So that could be very interesting. The books that they mentioned here are Jasmine and The Middleman and Other Stories. I will have to check out more about her later. Number 27, we're getting close. Jenny Zhang. Why you should read her. Her poetry is deliciously original, both exceedingly intimate in its revelations and brazenly unapologetic in its honesty, which sounds like a good quality. The volume that they have here is Dear Jenny, We Are All Fined. So I'm going to have to go back through and look at all of these poetry collections much more closely when I have a little more time and I'm not filming. Number 28, Oliver de la Paz. I have not heard of him. No, okay, another poet. Oliver de la Paz's poems are simultaneously fierce and tender, a celebration of language that is achingly beautiful and even seems to sing off of the page. Well, that's interesting. The collections they mentioned here are Requiem for the Orchard and Post Subject. Number 29. Oh no. I'm familiar with the book because it was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, but I don't know how to pronounce his name. Daniyal Mueenuddin. I really hope I even came close. I'll type it out down here. Why you should read him. His illuminating short story collection, In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, that's the Pulitzer Prize finalist, paints a stunning portrait of feudal Pakistan through linked stories that are enthralling in their beauty. I've heard really good things about that book. I do not own a copy, and I've never actually sought one out, but when I go back through this list, I'm going to have to bookmark that because that is something I would love to read. I've heard really good things about it over time, and it just keeps slipping off of my radar for some reason. Number 30, Wang Ping. Why you should read her. Wang Ping's work fearlessly tackles questions of identity, language, and culture, and her poetry masterfully conveys all the wonder and interconnectedness of nature. The volumes they mention are The Last Communist Virgin, interesting title, and 10,000 Waves. You can imagine, because it's poetry, I had not heard of her. So this list is really good for me in terms of discovering new authors that I was not familiar with, but also it's really challenging me to go back to embracing some poetry out in the world. Number 31, Ocean Vuong. I have read Ocean Vuong's novel, which I don't think was released at the time that this article was created. The novel is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and I liked parts of it. I kind of had quibbles with parts of it, but his writing is flawless. Why you should read him. Ocean Vuong is a fierce new voice in contemporary poetry, and his stunning lines have a vulnerable, dreamlike quality that speaks to the raw core of human existence. I've heard really good things about his poetry, but I have not read it. And he definitely brings that poet's precision to On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which again is a flawlessly, beautifully written novel, even if I had some quibbles with the book itself. And number 32, Hui Min Nguyen. I hope I pronounced that correctly as well. Why you should read him. His debut poetry collection, This Way to the Sugar, is bold and dizzyingly alive and relentless in its poignant observations of race and sexuality. And that sounds really interesting as well. So yeah, this article gave me a lot to consider, especially in terms of poetry. And you can see I still have a huge blind spot for poetry because pretty much any one of the poets on the list were completely unfamiliar to me, other than Ocean Vuong, who wrote a novel, and the novel is the part of his work that I have interacted with. I'm not proud, but it's true. So I need to do a lot of work. I'm going to go back through this list, which, by the way, I will link down below, and I'm going to bookmark a couple of these things and really make sure that they are on my TBR. And I've really enjoyed doing this. I'm going to try not to do too many, like, who are the best X writers or books and how many have I read. I don't want to do it to death. I probably will do it in April because I feel like Aussie April is like a natural way to do this. And we'll see. I may take a little bit of a break from there. But I definitely wanted to do this one because, like I said, it's really important to embrace all communities that make up this country. These communities are what make us great and what give us our identity. And we have to be here for them. And I'm going to be honest with you, I have a bit of a blind spot in my literary experience when it comes to Asian American writers, and that is something I need to challenge myself to do better on. So I challenge myself and I challenge you as well please get to know these authors and explore their work. And let's be kind to each other and try to have a happy society. I will leave it there for today. As always, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your comments and your feedback and all of that. So if you have thoughts, recommendations, especially recommendations of other Asian American authors, people you think should be on this list but we're not, put them in the comment section down below, please. I love the conversations that get going in the comments. It really makes this booktube experience wonderful. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.